What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the eCommerce Influence Podcast. My name's Austin Brawner.
Hey, and I'm Andrew Foxwell. It's good to be with you, my friend.
Dude, Foxwell, it's good to have you back on the podcast. I feel like there's been lots of people that have been missing your sweet voice on this podcast.
Well, hey, you know, I do have a sweet voice. I agree. So that's an apt description. And yeah, I have had a few people reach out as well. And so it's good to be back, throwing down some thoughts. And turns out raising a child in a pandemic or caring for a child in a pandemic takes a lot of time. So I know that many of you listening to this can potentially identify with that. So
I feel like that could be the understatement of the century.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. So
takes a lot of time.
Takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. Yes. So, but it's good to be back and good to be talking about Facebook ads and all of the wonderful changes and shifts and everything else that have happened this year, or even since January 1 of 2021, I feel like Facebook advertising has been quite a journey.
So what I feel like with this is you're like the Undertaker coming back from the dead to throw down on what's been happening with Facebook ads, bring some sanity to the conversation.
Oh my! Oh man! Oh no! Oh my God, the dead has risen.
Because, as anybody who's been advertising, anybody who's been running an e-commerce business knows, there's been a ton of changes and we're way overdue for a conversation about it. So why don't we dive into it? And actually, first, if people are watching the YouTube video, they're seeing my BTC Bitcoin 100,000 hat right now. I'm fired up about this. I'm fired up. Bitcoin's been ripping. It's been absolutely ripping. I got this hat and I put it on, and every day it's going up 5, almost 10%. So I can't take it off.
No.
So whenever you're watching this, you're watching the YouTube video. That's what this is for. I put the hat on. Bitcoin started ripping. I can't take it off until it stops ripping. So,
well, I mean,
we'll see.
The part that a lot of people don't know is, Austin hasn't been able to kiss Carly for a week because every time he tries to, the bill keeps hitting her in the face. So he wears it to bed.
I'm sleeping with it.
Yeah,
I'm sleeping with it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, we're all happy for you and I'm happy for those of you that are invested in crypto. It's been quite a run. So cheers to you.
It's been fun. It's been fun. It's a fun little diversion here. I saw this tweet today that was like from this guy. He was like, it said, "You a slave, wake up." In bed, check your Bitcoin. He's like, me an aristocrat. It was like, wake up, make breakfast, drink coffee, then check Bitcoin. Anyway, so Foxwell, let's freaking get to it. Tell what's been going on. Let's dive into it. What's the state of Facebook advertising? Where do you want to start here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand first to talk about really at this stage the iOS 14 and as it relates to the new operating system for phones. iOS devices that Apple came out with and had. I think Facebook and other platforms had known this was coming, but I don't think they knew the degree to which the privacy controls were going to be ramped up. So it was something that in the fourth quarter of 2020, we heard about, but we didn't know a lot about. We wrote a blog post on foxwelldigital.com on the blog about basically, here's what we know is coming. And I think we wrote it on December 18th. And it was a lot of just like, this was announced and here's what we know is going to happen. And so, the changes since then have continued. There's more that gets unearthed every day. And it sort of feels that one of our jobs is at Foxwell Digital now is to be, really detectives in some cases of understanding a lot of this information. So I think to start, you have to talk about what's not even iOS 14. I mean, but what is going on? Like what's actually the battle that's currently happening, and frame that up.
So today, if someone listens to this episode, we're going to get into it. What should they expect? What are we going to cover?
So I think today, what we'll cover is we're going to talk about iOS 14 and the implications of that on Facebook advertising and Instagram advertising, of course, goes under that. Then those things are also related to Snapchat advertising, Pinterest advertising, anything that has sort of trackable cookies as part of it. It's just that Facebook has been leaning forward on this more aggressively. So that's why we hear more about it from them.
Sure.
So we'll learn about that, what the changes are. We'll learn about what things you need to have installed. And then we'll talk a little bit about what you can do in terms of how people are thinking about optimization and even, scaling their Facebook ads or optimizing those Facebook ads themselves.
Cool. Well, I'm excited. Yeah. We'll take it big picture, then try to get a little tactical on what you can actually take away and make some progress. So let's start. What happened? Right? When I'm sitting here on the sideline and I'm on Twitter and I'm kind of following along, talking with business owners. There's this standoff between Apple and Facebook, high stakes game. They're going back and forth, making statements about privacy. What is iOS 14? Why does it matter? What happened?
Yeah, so basically, Apple looked at the consumer. This is my personal view. I don't know this for a fact, but basically, what Apple did is look at the consumer landscape and said, part of a marketing strategy for us clearly needs to include privacy, and needs to be talking about how we're the champions of consumer privacy. So
it's genius.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, it
is single. It's like some of the best positioning that I've seen in years.
Correct. So they led with that, saying we're going to be the champions. Everything that's downloaded on our through the App Store or on your phone is going to go through a prompt, saying, do you know this app has cookies, and then allowing you to opt in and out, in or out rather. So that's basically the core of it, and because of that, as Facebook marketers, we then lose a lot of data because we don't have the trackability that we once did. So we don't have, for those that opt in, we'll have some, and there's a lot of nuance around this, so we'll get into this. But basically, iOS 14 it's a very opt in and out, and it's basically where Facebook and Apple rather controls the gates and the flow of data to other apps. So this is the part that nobody really is talking about at this point, which is you can think about this as basically a dam being open where you're raising and lowering the level of said reservoir. That's what Apple's been able to do with data, and what that timing relationship inner workings of, we don't even fully know or understand yet. And I can tell you that most of us in the industry are very actively trying to understand that more deeply at this stage still.
And when you talk about this, like you're describing it as opening the gates, lowering the gates. So when you say you don't understand exactly what's happening, like, can you dive into that a little bit deeper? Like, what are you trying to understand?
Yeah, so basically, let's take an example of one thing that we do know for sure, and we can transfer into talking about things we know that this affects. Okay, so One thing we do know for sure is that is around attribution windows. And traditionally, we were able to measure in the default attribution window, i.e. the time of measurement that you could measure the results of your Facebook ads within, on Facebook was a 28-day click, 1-day view. Okay, so if you got a 2 times return on ad spend, after 1 day, and you went back up to 28 days later, that number would have increased because it's measuring that within a click window of somebody converted within a click, not just a view. Okay. So one thing that we do know for sure is that this is affecting the attribution window. And currently, through the API, you can still measure 28-day windows, but the enforcement from Apple is coming, and we will thus forward only be able to optimize or see data off of a 7-day click window. That's what we'll have.
Okay.
And 7-day click and sometimes 1-day view. So what I mean by that is the inner workings of that. It's stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, we know that 7-day click is going to be something we will see. But the timing of which that data gets released, I love the word cadence for some reason. So the cadence of which that data being released is up in the air. Right now, they're saying that it's going to be 3 days, up to 3 days delayed. So you could have results that look something 1 day, and 3 days later, Apple will open the floodgates and that data flows to your Facebook ads.
Interesting.
It's things like that. And this is
where the confusion is and why it can
absolutely.
be frustrating, because it's like, hey, all the things that we know or have known are now a little bit different, and they may not be performing the way that they have in the past.
Right. And I think a lot of it, too, that's important for those of you that have tried to understand this further to understand is there's a gentleman at a company or a website named Mobile Dev Demo. His name is Eric Sufer, and he was on Stratechery. I mean, he's an incredibly knowledgeable person about this. But he is an expert specifically on, if you've seen his stuff, he's really talked about this and is leading the way. He's an expert specifically on mobile app attribution and tracking, which is similar but also worlds different than what we do in the world of direct response. So that world has been affected even more, almost decimated in terms of tracking. And so a lot of the information is very like world ending, because a lot of information flows from app developers and from Eric, and because he's super smart on this, but a lot of it is they're conflating things that aren't true necessarily for direct response advertisers.
Interesting.
So in terms of what we know, so let's talk more about that. So we know that there'll be 7-day click optimization is going to be the most accurate. We know that data in terms of that flow is going to be delayed. We know that some reporting data is going to be lost. For example, breakdowns by age and gender. We won't be able to see that. One of the really important pieces is that you as an advertiser will get to or have to customize your top event. You get 8 prioritized event. Now, why 8 prioritized events? I don't know why 8. Okay, nobody knows. But you get to say, to me, the most important thing is a purchase and understanding purchases. And if you select that at this time, currently, you will still, for somebody that opts out, be able to see that event coming from something that happened on Apple to Facebook. Okay, so you'll be able to see only the top event.
Explain that a little bit more. So
this is like, I should get a drink.
This makes a lot of sense, right?
Super easy to understand. Super easy to understand.
So you moved the top event, so you pick the thing that matters the most to you.
Correct.
And then if somebody opts out, they can't opt out of the first event. Is that what it is? The event that matters the most?
That's correct. They can't opt out. Now here's some more caveats to this. So they can't opt out of that. Now but it will be delayed.
Yep.
And it will only be on a 7-day click.
Okay. All
so
right.
You see where this goes, right? Like it's the decision-making process of which we are actually familiar with, right? Within Facebook ads, okay, you look here and you make this decision, is like totally different. And still we wrote an article on the blog last week about how to optimize your Facebook ads, and these all be in the resources. Definitely check them out. I mean, we spent a lot of time writing these blog posts. As actually as a catalyst for us to understand it further. And
for sure. When you write something, it gets more clear, right? I feel like that every time I write a newsletter, it's like it gets more clear after I do the research.
And just as a plug, if you're not on Austin's newsletters, by the way, they're really good and you should definitely sign up for them. One of the only ones that I read, honestly. It's just really helpful stuff. But I think that, the 8 event thing, getting back to that, you can prioritize those, and basically Facebook is saying you will prioritize these because we will use them as signals in terms of the order of importance of the optimization, even though you may not be able to be reported on them. So that's what we know for now. We also know that things like remarketing pools are going to be smaller, okay? Because for those people that have opted out, you will not be able to remarket to those people that have opted out, okay? Because that's cached-based remarketing, or cookie-based remarketing, rather. So you won't be able to remarket to those. So you still will be able to remarket, but your pools will be a lot smaller. We also know, though, as an upside, that there should be, or there hopefully will be, no degrading of audiences that are platform dependent. So what I mean by that is things like
Facebook platform dependent, right?
Correct. So that would be things like engagement custom audiences. That would be things like in video view custom audiences. This is why, and you can see if you've seen messaging on this within Facebook, your ads manager, your business manager, or your Facebook page, they're saying like, hey, have you set up Facebook shops? You should set up Facebook shops. It's great because those are more custom audiences. Now, Facebook shops, I said to somebody the other day, is akin to a Volvo driving into a garage full of Porsches. Like everybody looks around and they're like, why is this here? I don't understand. Like Facebook shops doesn't make any sense. and it's like fine, but super complicated to set up. So again, intention, good, execution, poor. But
let's talk about intention, right? Intention, good. What does that mean? Right?
Well, I mean, intention is they
question Facebook's intentions all the time.
Yes, but intention of it from a small business standpoint is good, right? They want to be able to have your products easy to sell, et cetera. But the setup of it's pretty clunky, but it'll allow you to do eventually opened product things where it's not dependent on your website. This is why that would be. There's no degrading of those audiences. So that's another thing that we do know. And the final thing I'll say on what we do know is that we don't know what Google's doing either. Okay, the answers that Google has given and Alphabet have given on this have been, pretty mucky, and we don't know we don't necessarily understand what if UTMs are going to be affected on this, etc. So right now UTMs are not affected, but moving forward, it's anybody's guess, and my guess is that it's going to be pretty confusing. So. And not as reliable. So let's. These are there's a lot more that we know, but those are the main ones. The main ones are the way that you optimize is going to change. The way that you understand currently how to do decision making is going to change. The data you get is not going to be there, and a lot of the ways that you built a traditional funnel are not going to be there.
I want to dive in before we go into. That's one thing I want to get some clarification on, and maybe you're going to cover this in the next section where we're going to talk about what to do. But the thing that comes up for me is the data being delayed and the cadence of things dumping in maybe 3-day periods where it's like, okay, I don't get any data, then boom, it dumps every 3 days. How is this impacting reporting, and how are people thinking about this from the perspective of like an advertiser or business owner? Because like you used to be able to go in there and like check it out every day. Right? Maybe even the beginning of the day.
So these are for people, I have to be very clear about language on this. The delay is for those that have opted out. Okay.
So there's going to be the people who've opted in, and that delay is not going to happen.
That's correct.
The delay for people who've opted out
correct.
For the top metric that you choose. Is that correct?
No, they have opted out of all tracking, basically. And the only thing that you'd be able to see is that top metric that you choose. As a result, correct. So that's the only one that you'd be able to get to.
So in general, this is going to impact your purchase data. If you're a direct response advertiser in e-commerce and your top metric is actually purchases, then you may go through, look back at your numbers, and then a data dump will happen, and you'll see higher levels of purchases from people who've opted out.
Right, exactly. So, this gets into to your question, how are people dealing with this? And I think that they're dealing with this in terms of,
let's dive it.
longer term decision making. Okay, so you can look at things in a longer window, 3-day window, 7-day window, et cetera. So that's actually, I think, a good thing for advertisers, because one of the things that we as a challenge have is clients blowing us up and saying, hey, why is this down? Why is that down? And really, we're in the age of looking at things every day. If you're spending a lot of money, obviously you want to do that. But if you look in a longer window, you can generally do better decision making.
Sure.
But you're looking longer decision window. Another thing that you can do is decide what metrics you are going to measure in terms of leading indicators, and that could be things like unique click-through rate. That could be things like custom metrics that we talk about actually in our new testing course, like the see more rate, which is looking at all the engagements divided by unique link clicks. How many people are clicking on stuff, right? Like so there's things that you can get into to try to develop leading indicators. You can look at things like post-purchase surveys, in terms of, if I spend more incrementally, am I seeing my post-purchase numbers rising incrementally as well? We're getting into actually the second part about it. But this is like the types of things that we'll talk more about. But there's some technical things you got to do too to be ready for it, I think.
Well, let's dive in there. What should people do? Like, what are some of the baseline? All right, check the box. You got to do this in this new normal. How do you make sure you're at least checking the initial boxes?
Well, I think initially, there's. I'll just go down the list of the things that are essential that you've got to do. One is you've got to have and install the conversion API for Shopify. Most of you are on Shopify, and so you've got to have CAPI installation. We have an article about this on the blog, definitely worth checking out.
We've also recorded an episode about this as well, a previous episode, which we'll link.
We did
about conversion API.
Yeah, so you got to get CAPI. You've got to verify your domain, and you should have been forced to do this in the last 2 weeks. If you haven't, this means that you basically have to say, I'm the owner of this domain, etc. For those of you that use multiple domains, like lead pages and other things in different parts of your funnel, this is currently a major point of confusion in the industry, and there's not a great way to do it yet. So we're working on trying to learn more about that. But at this stage, I'm not going to even share what I know about it, because it's just going to create more confusion. But you got to verify your domain, basically, and say, yes, I own it.
And that's verifying with who? With Facebook?
You're verifying it with Facebook. That's correct. And you're doing that within the Business Manager product of Facebook. The other thing, next one that you want to do is you want to calculate, this ties into what we talked about a little bit, where you want to calculate what we would call your DAM, or your delayed attribution multiplier. Okay, so you want to, if you can, while you still have this data, look at the relationship between a 7-day click, 28-day click, and understand the previous data, what those numbers look like. So if you know that previously on a 7-day click, you'd get a 2x, and on a 28-day click, you would get a 3x. Okay, well then there's an increase of 100% there. You can tie those two things together. You can say, okay, I know that putting in the data that I have on a 7-day click, I can put those numbers in, and then it'll give you what sort of your delayed attribution multipliers are. If this is confusing and you have questions, we have a template for this actually on our blog as well. That is, you can download. It's like a Google sheet, and it walks you through it. So, and I know in the coalition, I know Matt Lady has resources on this too. There's basically trying to understand. This
isn't that complicated. It sounds like maybe it's a little complicated. It's not.
No.
I mean, I think also one thing you said was 2x to 3x. I think that'd be a 50% increase.
Sorry, 50%. Yes.
For people who are taking notes.
Yes, 50%
right now.
And yeah, so you want to understand basically the relationship historically between numbers. That's basically what it is. So,
and it's all based on your performance.
Correct.
It's not like, oh, we're going to go find the delayed attribution multiplier of the industry. No, it's like, what have you seen in the past?
Right. And an example of this is if you have a higher dollar product, your DAM is going to be higher because people take longer to buy. As a side note, a previous podcast guest and current Foxwell Digital client for a long time, Jeremy from Tradlands, he actually did a part of their post-purchase survey recently asking, how long have you been following us before you purchased, something along these lines? And he found out that something like 80% of their customers had been following them for 3 months or longer. So
wow.
It's kind of an interesting thing to point out in terms of,
for sure.
What you might be trying to kind of look at those relationships of longer term numbers.
What's next? So you've set this thing up, delayed attribution multiplier. Mm-hmm. Then you want to set up you talked about the events. What do people need to do to get these 8 events set up?
Yeah, so you go into Business Manager, it's in the Events Manager, and it walks you through it. You just start to customize those 8 events. Now, if you're using and you want to still do value-based return on ad spend reporting, that is now done in buckets of value. So it's like 0 to 199, and then it goes up from there. So those value, and I don't remember the exact ranges, but you can customize those, but they actually take up 4 of the 8 events. This is getting a little technical, but basically, if you want to do return on ad spend reporting, you can, but it's in ranges, so it's less accurate. So those also are part of this optimization prioritization event thing that's all within the Business Manager. So you can walk through there and do that. The next thing you want to do is install a post-purchase attribution tool. There's one that I'm heavily involved in that I think people will like. It's called Prove It. There's obviously Inquire is a great product. So these are out there, and they're helpful because they give you another read alongside of a lot of this data that you're losing. So that's important.
I would argue, like, this is something I've been working on with all my clients right now. If they don't have a post-purchase attribution tool or a post-purchase survey, it's like step number 1. Let's get that going, because if you have nothing else, you can still run your advertising based on that.
Yeah, right.
And it's figuring out your own model. Like, okay, we spent $1,000 on Monday, and the post-purchase survey told us that it brought in $4,000 on Facebook and Instagram, right? Like, you can use that if you forget about everything else to be able to run your advertising. Yeah,
right. And it's just, it doesn't hurt, to know. So that's something that you want to make sure that you have involved. Or that you have set up. So those are really the big ones that you want to have set up: prioritization of events, installing Conversion API, making sure that you have the post-purchase attribution tool set up, and understanding your delayed attribution multipliers. In terms of then decision making, that gets really specific by the person and by the agency of what you're looking at. And right now, because not everybody has that 14, it's actually iOS 14.4 is the one that really starts to track it further. Because not everybody has that, we are still seeing a lot of data coming through. So there's currently more data than we will have in the future. So the optimization process has not changed that radically. Most people are looking at longer windows now. They're looking at that between a blend of post-purchase attribution. And there's a lot of different strategies that people are deploying. Also, there's a lot of jargon that people are acting like they have like some proprietary way to measure this. This is the danger of a lot of these changes, is that there's going to be a lot of people that if you read something and you feel by reading it that there is something that they're trying to sell you, they probably are. Like there's not, there's no secret sauce on this. Nobody's doing it perfectly at this point, right? And there's a lot of people that try to use jargony technical language to confuse people to sell stuff. And so just don't get caught in that. The optimization post that we have on our blog walks through, I think we have 6 different agencies and how they are optimizing right now. That's how they choose to optimize. We're we literally took what they wrote and put it on the blog. Like, how are you doing this? So that's helpful to you because you can kind of see like where people's heads are at. And we plan to do one of those like once a month, honestly, because I feel like it's going to keep changing.
One mental like model that I've had recently through the last year is, and I think it's very helpful with this, is anybody who has a lot of confidence about what's going on in Facebook, in politics, in COVID, I am very skeptical of.
Yeah.
Right? The more confidence they have, the less confidence I have in them.
Yeah.
And it's more like there's so much nuance and there's so much. I think it's a really, really good point what you're making of anybody who feels like they've got this thing figured out is probably got some ulterior motive. And so just keep that in mind, that sometimes going back to like first principles and thinking, how can we make this simple? Like, what were we doing before all of this? I mean, there's to a certain level, like, we've been incredibly spoiled.
Oh, absolutely.
See exactly down to the dollar the return on ad spend. That has never happened before. So how do you think, if you didn't have that before, what were you doing? What are the ways you could figure this thing out?
Shane Cicero, a colleague at Foxwell Digital, many of you know, Shane brought up a great point, which is that back in the day when we were running Blender's Eyewear, I mean, and Pura Vida bracelets, this is what we were doing. I mean, we didn't have return on ad spend. No. So like we were running it pretty much blind. It was the early days of conversion ads. They were pretty unreliable. So, this is...
We've been here before.
We've been here before. And I think that really the barrier... There's two things to mention. One is the barrier to understand this is a little bit greater. So, there's if you feel currently overwhelmed with running your Facebook ads, I encourage you to start looking at an agency, to be honest, even if or a consultant, or, just to help answer some of these questions that you're like, this feels weird, right? And it's going to be worth your time because there's a lot to it. And having somebody to simply ask like these questions that I've had to ask more questions that I would deem as like, this might be a dumb question. And no, it's not a dumb question. Like it's to wrap your head around it's a lot. So know that that's okay and totally normal.
You combine this as well with a lot of like seemingly arbitrary Facebook accounts being locked and banned. Right. This happened to us a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
Right. Running the same ad that we've been running for a long time. We hadn't even messed with it, and just out of the blue, banned. And across our community, it's like everybody, we see posts every single day, being like, oh, my account just got locked. Have no idea why. All these things are just ratcheting up the frustration around this platform that has made it kind of a perfect storm. It's like, So yeah, it's you're not alone if you're frustrated.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention too. Finishing my point from earlier, then going into other platforms really briefly. I think that these changes and things like this hurt a lot of you that are either minimally involved or are just getting involved in this. Right? These hurt small operations more because the barrier to entry is higher of learning. You won't be able to launch an ad as well and see the ROAS so quickly, and the buy-in will be lower. So that's really who it hurts, is those of you that, you're doing it on your own, or you're kind of dipping your toe in the water, because it's the decision-making process is changing, et cetera. I think that as you look at this, one question as I've gone through a lot of these explanations, the people that they immediately go to is, where else can I go? And I think that it's important to point out that really the opportunity from a demand generation standpoint is still the biggest on Facebook and Instagram. And I don't think that's going to change. Now, I think that there are certainly opportunities incrementally with things like Snapchat. There are opportunities incrementally with things like TikTok influencers, right? But that's a whole other can of worms. And the attribution is even worse and more confusing on those platforms. So if you're okay with accepting more of an unknown, then testing incrementally there is a good idea, and there's more there, but the volume of people is not going to be as great as it is on Facebook and Instagram. Pinterest is another one, right, if you're in certain markets. So it can, but it's not going to be as good. And so you just need... I think we all need to be better at accepting less data and less day-to-day decision making, and making sure that you're going through the process we've talked about in other episodes of agency versus freelancer, and understanding what you need, and potentially hiring out to make sure that it makes sense, or hiring someone internally that can really do this for you, because it's not going to get any easier. And I think, I know we all know you and I both know a lot of CEOs that run their Facebook ads, and it's 70% of their job. And then at this point, I'm like, the opportunity cost is so great. Like, just get out of there. You don't need to be doing this.
Well, I think a lot of this comes back also to long-term thinking.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, when you look at some of these other platforms and channels, one of the conversations I have most often with my clients is, they see an opportunity to be able to dive into a new channel. And my discussion with them is, what is the opportunity cost of you diving into this new channel? Whether that's the amount of money you need to spend, right? Getting involved with YouTube advertising, for example. That there's a high barrier to entry to get involved with YouTube advertising, because you've got all the creative, you've got the amount of money that you need to spend to just test it, which is much higher than what you in the past needed to test for Facebook. And what Andrew's point, I think you eloquently explained, it's like all this is doing, it's hurting the people that want to dip their toe in and take a very small chance and start very small on Facebook. It's not really hurting the people who are going to invest $75,000 to get going on Facebook advertising.
Right.
They're going to do it. It's going to be fine. So think in those terms. It's like, if this is going to be something long-term for your business, invest and make it happen.
Correct.
And that's the same with all other channels. It's not going to be it's not that much different, right? Pinterest, TikTok, you need to invest and think long-term, not like, oh, well, let's see if this is going to work. And that never works anyway, right? Like, I don't think I've ever seen worked with a client that's like, oh, I'm going to test this out for like 30 days on Facebook and see if it works. Right. It doesn't work.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, if you have questions, always reach out to me, Andrew at foxwelldigital.com. Like the reason I'm plugging our blog a lot is because we've spent a lot of time putting out free stuff there that's like very, very useful and very good deep dives. And I think that a lot of the things that you see from people like Deepesh Mandalia, who's another Facebook advertising expert, or from Nick Shackelford, those are great guides, but they're for Facebook advertisers. They're really deep. They're like 30, 40 page documents. And so we've tried to be a little bit in between. It's deep stuff, but also stuff that a lot of people I know listening to this would hopefully understand. And I think it's not as overwhelming, because you download a 30-page PDF. Like, I'm out. It's a lot. This
is overwhelming, right? We've been talking about this for half an hour, 40 minutes at this point, and we haven't even got to the point of like, where are we going? Right. So this is the part where we kind of like try to wrap this thing up a little bit. What do you know that Facebook is working on? Where do we go from here, Andrew?
I think it's important to point out that Facebook knows that this is a little bit that this is very confusing for a lot of people right now. And Apple currently, the thing that we know that not a lot of people are talking about is Apple has a measurement tool called PCM, private click measurement. And then Facebook has a tool called aggregated event measurement, AEM. Okay. And the AEM stuff that they're working on is hopefully going to start to fill in some of these holes of the confusion around the 8 events, the data being delayed, and help to model things easier for us. So that's something we know in terms of hope that's coming, right? That there's going to be Facebook knows to prove this long term, to prove their platform long term to people, or even in the short term, it can't be this difficult. And so that is coming. AEM is something that they're working on. It'll have more information, and there'll be more visual understanding of it, and there'll be a better way to get measurements on, hey, this has been doing well for us. So so that's something that gives us a little hope.
Is that kind of, private click measurement and aggregated event measurement, when you talk about that, is the big picture of that, like, we're going to be able to figure out how people are acting and the decisions they're making without connecting directly to them? Is that kind of the thought process?
Kind of the thought process, yeah. To me, the way that I explain this is that it's really just it allows us to connect more dots. So, and we don't know yet what that looks like, but the way that it's been spoken about is that it allows us to connect significantly more dots than we currently have. So this all got sprung. Facebook's been trying to come up with a lot of ways to get the information out. It's been piecemeal. It's been confusing. And so over time, I think we're looking solid. And I think in terms of Q3 and Q4 of this year, I think that there'll be more solid optimization processes. We'll be more on track. And I think that Facebook as a growth company as well will be better suited. And I think we'll have still technical issues with the platform like always, but I think we'll have a stable Q3 and 4.
You don't want those to go away. What would the joy be of Facebook Ads Manager without the glitches?
Right, that's what keeps me employed. So, the breaking, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Anything else that is coming down the pipe?
I just know improvements on the conversion API and improvements upon, things that they are allowing, again, more dot connecting. So those are the big ones that I know. I don't know about, any sort of other targeting stuff yet. They've been very cagey about that, but I do know that there's plans for the measurement side of it to make that a lot easier and more visual. So we know that's coming.
Cool. Well, to wrap it up here, so big picture stuff, there's lots of changes that are happening as you guys are all experiencing. There are things that we can do, right? Implement CAPI, verified domain, calculate delayed attribution multiplier, set up your 8 events, and pick your highest priority one that you care about. Go out of your way right now if you haven't done it. Put together a post-purchase survey tool. And one thing I'll say about that is be very thoughtful about how you put together that survey, right? So sometimes when you're thinking about it and you ask people where they found you, think about from the consumer's perspective and then calculate on your end. So when I say by the consumer's perspective, don't say a lot of consumers don't realize Facebook and Instagram are the same thing. So maybe you need to say, hey, Facebook or Instagram is where I saw you, and combine that so that you can figure out where people actually, found you. Make sure you put in from a friend all the different ways that they might have ended up finding you. Facebook Shops, go check out Andrew's optimization posts. Go Foxwell Digital's got a lot of stuff there. There are things you can do. You're all in this right now, and there'll be more information, and we'll keep you up to date on the podcast as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening. Good to see you, Austin.
Good to see you too, man. Thanks so much for bringing this knowledge, and I know you've been in the weeds, just weed whacking for months to get this. So
yeah,
I appreciate it.
You bet.
Awesome, man. Thank you.